Nehemiah Griego. On January 19, 2013, a 15-year-old boy walked into Calvary, Albuquerque, one of the largest churches in New Mexico, and spent the entire day wandering the hallways alone. He sat in empty rooms. He drifted through corridors. Staff members saw him but thought nothing of it because they knew him. His father was a beloved pastor who had served the church for years. Then, late that afternoon, the boy approached the church's security officer and told him something that would bring the Albuquerque police, the FBI, and national news crews descending on the South Valley within hours. He told the officer that his entire family was gone, that he was the one who had taken their lives. It was 2013, and the Griego family was well known in the South Valley community south of Albuquerque. Greg Griego, 51, was a former pastor at Calvary, Albuquerque, a fire department chaplain, and a prison ministry volunteer. His wife Sarah was 40. They had 5 children, and by every outward measure, the family appeared close-knit and deeply rooted in their faith. What no one in the community knew was that their 15-year-old son, Nehemiah, had been spiraling, and the events of that January night would test the legal boundaries of how New Mexico treats its youngest offenders. Around midnight, while Sarah slept in the family's home, Nehemiah took a .22 caliber rifle and ended her life. His younger brother, who had been sleeping beside her, woke to the sound. Nehemiah showed the boy what he had done, and then took his life as well. He moved through the house and took the lives of his 2 youngest siblings, both of whom were small children. He then waited for hours. Around 5 in the morning, when his father Greg returned home from a graveyard shift at a local homeless shelter, Nehemiah ambushed him with an AR-15 style rifle. 5 members of the Griego family were gone before dawn. The youngest was 2 years old. Investigators later learned that Nehemiah had reloaded weapons, packed the family van with ammunition, and planned to continue at a local Walmart, hoping to die in a shootout with police. Instead, something changed. He drove to Calvary, Albuquerque, the same church where his father had once led the congregation, and spent the entire day wandering the building. For hours, he moved through the halls of a church built on the faith his family had devoted their lives to, carrying the knowledge of what he had done in the dark. Late in the afternoon, he approached a church security officer and confessed. The officer contacted authorities immediately. The legal proceedings that followed became one of the most contentious juvenile sentencing battles in New Mexico history. Originally charged with 5 counts of first-degree taking of a life, Nehemiah ultimately pleaded to 2 counts of second-degree charges for his parents and 3 counts of child abuse, resulting in death for his siblings in October 2015. In February 2016, Children's Court Judge John Romero ruled that Nehemiah was amenable to treatment as a juvenile, meaning he would walk free by age 21. The ruling stunned prosecutors. Bernalillo County District Attorney Kari Brandenburg appealed, arguing that the scope of the violence and the evidence of premeditation made juvenile treatment inadequate. The case moved through the courts for years. In August 2019, Judge Alisa Hart issued a 75-page order reversing the juvenile ruling, finding that Nehemiah was not amenable to treatment. On November 1, 2019, Hart sentenced him to 3 concurrent life terms plus 7 years, with parole eligibility after 30 years on the child abuse counts. That puts his earliest possible release around age 52. Nehemiah's defense challenged the sentence under the 8th Amendment, arguing cruel and unusual punishment. The New Mexico Supreme Court rejected the challenge and upheld the sentence in full. As of 2026, Nehemiah Griego remains in the custody of the New Mexico Department of Corrections, where he will stay for at least another 2 decades before he can appear before a parole board. Of the 10 cases on this list, Griegos is the one that forced an entire state to ask how young is too young to lock away forever. The next case forced a different question entirely, because in that one, they actually let him out. Eric Smith. Every case on this list ends the same way. A life sentence, a cell, a future erased. Every case except one. One person on this list walked out of prison, finished parole, and as of April 2025, is living as a completely free man. His name is Eric Smith, and the story of what he did at 13 years old in the summer of 1993 remains one of the most debated parole decisions in New York history. If you had asked anyone in the small village of Savona, New York, about Eric Smith in the summer of 1993, they would have told you he was the red-haired kid who got picked on. He was bullied relentlessly for his appearance, his thick glasses, his low-set ears. He was a child who had endured abuse at home, and by the accounts of those who knew him, he was a boy whose anger had no outlet. On August 2, 1993, a young boy named Derek Roby was walking to a park day camp just 1 block from his home. It was the first time his parents, Doreen and Dale, had let him make the short walk alone. Smith intercepted Derek on his bicycle, led him into a wooded area off the path, and took his life. The details of what happened in those woods were presented at trial, and the scope of the harm inflicted on the child was staggering for the age of the perpetrator. Derek's body was found within hours. A family friend noticed unusual behavior from Smith, and his mother brought him in to speak with investigators. He confessed roughly a week later. Smith was tried as an adult, making him one of the youngest defendants to face a murder charge in New York at that time. The defense argued intermittent explosive disorder. The prosecution countered with ADHD and depression, arguing that his condition did not explain the nature of the attack. On August 16, 1994, Smith was convicted of second-degree taking of a life and sentenced to 9 years to life. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. That 9-to-life sentence set the stage for one of the longest and most publicly scrutinized parole battles in New York history. Smith appeared before the parole board 11 times over 19 years. He was denied in 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, and January 2020. 11 hearings, 10 denials. And each time, the Roby family appeared to oppose his release. Dale and Doreen Roby described the loss of their son at nearly every hearing. Prosecutor John Tunney publicly called Smith a budding serial offender and argued he should never be freed. At one early hearing, Smith himself told the board that the act of strangulation had given him a positive feeling, a statement that followed him through every subsequent review. Then, on October 5, 2021, the board granted parole at his 11th hearing. The board cited his low recidivism score, only 3 minor disciplinary issues in 28 years of incarceration, and what they described as compelling growth and development since the age of his offense. Smith was released on February 1, 2022, to an approved address in Queens, New York, after months of delays securing housing. He became engaged to a woman who had first written to him while studying the juvenile justice system, and he pursued studies in evangelism. He settled into a life that, by all public accounts, was quiet and unremarkable. On April 16, 2025, Smith was officially discharged from parole supervision by the New York Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. He is now entirely free, living without state oversight of any kind more than 30 years after the crime that put him behind bars as a child. As of 2026, Eric Smith remains the only person on this list who is no longer incarcerated. Whether the parole board made the right call is something people are still arguing about. Smith acted alone, and his crime was an act of sudden violence with no planning. The next case on this list is the opposite in almost every way, because these two brothers planned what they were going to do in detail, and the scope of what they intended was far worse than what they actually carried out. Robert and Michael Bever, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. July 22, 2015. A boy, barely conscious and bleeding, managed to reach a phone and dial 911. His voice was faint. He told the dispatcher that his family was being harmed, and then the line went quiet. When Officer Brandon Tenner arrived at the house, he heard faint cries coming from somewhere inside. He kicked in the front door and followed a trail of blood through the home. He found a girl, severely wounded, still alive. K-9 units tracked two figures into the woods behind the property, where they found the Bever brothers. Robert, 18, was covered in his mother's blood. Inside the house, 5 members of the Bever family had been taken from this world. Father David, 52, Mother April, 44, and 3 of their younger children, all of whom were minors. A 2-year-old, the youngest in the family, had been asleep upstairs the entire time and was found unharmed. The brothers had either forgotten about her or never reached her. Crystal, the eldest surviving child, had been the first one harmed, with injuries severe enough that she nearly did not survive. She had tried to run outside, but was dragged back in. It was her brother Daniel who had managed the 911 call that brought police, even as he himself lay dying from his wounds. Robert and Michael Bever had been homeschooled and largely isolated from the outside world. They had few friends, minimal contact with extended family, and almost no presence in the community. By the time investigators began examining their devices and journals, a picture emerged that went far beyond what had happened inside that house. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Robert Bever told investigators that the family attack was just the beginning. The brothers had planned to dismember the bodies, store them in bins in the attic, steal the family car, and then carry out a mass casualty attack across Oklahoma and into Washington state. Robert stated that their goal was a body count between 50 and 500. He told police that the act of taking a life made him feel like a god, and that he idolized serial offenders. A delivery of roughly 3,000 rounds of ammunition was scheduled to arrive the next day. Robert pleaded guilty in September 2016 to 5 counts of first-degree charges, plus assault with intent. He received 5 terms of life without parole, plus 1 additional life term, all consecutive. In July 2019, he attacked 2 prison staff at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center with a sharpened instrument. That earned him 3 more life sentences in November 2020. He is currently serving 9 consecutive life sentences at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Michael was tried as an adult. His trial began on April 16, 2018. On May 9th, the jury found him guilty. Under the Miller v. Alabama framework, the jury determined he was not irreparably corrupt and permanently incorrigible, which meant he could not receive life without parole. Judge Sharon Holmes sentenced him to 5 consecutive life terms, plus 28 years. Under Oklahoma's 45-year life definition and 85% rule, his theoretical parole eligibility falls sometime in the 2200s. 225 years from the date of sentencing, give or take. You would think someone would have said something before it reached this point. Nobody did. The Bever family home was demolished. Reflection Park opened on the site on March 27, 2019, as a memorial to the family. The 2 surviving sisters, Crystal and the youngest child, were adopted by a family in Tulsa. Their identities have been protected by the courts. As of 2026, Robert Bever remains at Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Michael Bever, remains at Lexington Correctional Center. Robert gave his first on-camera interview to a Tulsa news station in November 2025, around the 10-year anniversary of the attack. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Michael's consecutive sentencing, confirming that his theoretical parole eligibility falls well into the 2200s. The Bever brothers carried out their violence in silence, inside a home where no one from the outside world could see. The next case is the opposite. It happened in broad daylight, in a pub car park, in front of witnesses, and still it took over a year to get an arrest. Sean Mercer. 3 years before the Bever family tragedy in Oklahoma, on the other side of the Atlantic, an 11-year-old boy named Reese Jones was walking home from football practice in Liverpool. He was a season ticket holder at Everton, the kind of kid whose weekends revolved around the pitch. His parents, Stephen and Melanie, were expecting him home for dinner. So why did Reese Jones never make it across the car park of the Fir Tree Pub in Croxteth that evening? On August 22, 2007, Sean Mercer, a 16-year-old member of the Croxteth crew, pulled out a Smith & Wesson revolver in the pub car park and fired 3 shots at rival gang members from the Strand crew. One of the rounds struck Reese. He collapsed in the car park, just yards from where other families were going about their evening. Reese Jones passed away in his mother's arms before paramedics could intervene. Mercer was not aiming at Reese. He was not aware of Reese. He did not know his name. A child walking home from football practice stepped into the crossfire of a gang war he knew nothing about, and it cost him his life. The Croxteth crew and the Strand crew had been feuding for years, and the violence between them had escalated steadily through 2007. Reese Jones had no connection to either group. He was simply in the wrong car park at the wrong time. What came next was a 16-month investigation that tested Merseyside police in ways they had not experienced before. The community in Croxteth, despite its horror at what had happened to Reese, was locked behind a wall of gang loyalty and fear. Witnesses refused to come forward. Doors stayed closed. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood repeatedly and were met with silence. Mercer moved freely through the area for over a year, while investigators built their case through mobile phone records, ballistics analysis, CCTV footage, and lengthy surveillance operations. The breakthrough came when a witness, identified in court only as Boy X, agreed to testify after being granted protection. The trial at Liverpool Crown Court lasted 9 weeks. On December 16, 2008, Sean Mercer, by then 18, was found guilty of taking the life of Reese Jones. Justice Irwin, in his sentencing remarks, called Mercer a coward who had no answer to the case against him. Mercer was sentenced to detention at His Majesty's pleasure for life, with a minimum term of 22 years, less 243 days, for time on remand. He will be eligible for a parole review around 2030, when he is roughly 40 years old. Several co-defendants were convicted of assisting an offender, including James Yates, whose original 7-year sentence was raised to 12 on appeal by the Solicitor General. Dean Kelly, Nathan Quinn, Gary Kays, and Melvin Coy were also convicted on related charges. Parents of multiple gang members were later convicted of perverting the course of justice for helping destroy clothing and other evidence tied to the shooting. And no, the story did not end with the verdict. In November 2009, while incarcerated, Mercer attacked a fellow inmate with a weapon fashioned from tweezers. The inmate he targeted had taken the life of another young person in a separate case. The city of Liverpool closed ranks around the Jones family in the years that followed. 2,500 people attended Reese's funeral at Liverpool Cathedral. Liverpool FC played Everton's anthem before a derby match in tribute. The Reese Jones Community Center opened in Croxteth Park on August 31, 2013. Built on the same streets where he had played football and walked home from practice. ITV produced a 4-part drama called Little Boy Blue in 2017, telling the story of the investigation and the family's fight for justice. Stephen and Melanie Jones became vocal advocates for anti-gang measures in Merseyside. As of 2026, Sean Mercer remains in the UK prison system, approaching his earliest parole review date. Under British law, detention at His Majesty's pleasure carries a mandatory parole board review at the minimum term, unlike American life without parole sentences. Whether the board grants release when that review comes around 2030 remains to be seen. Mercer's bullet found the wrong person and devastated a city. The next case involves someone who chose his targets deliberately, walked into a public building in the middle of the afternoon, and opened fire on strangers. Nathaniel Jouet. At 4:15 in the afternoon on August 28, 2017, a 16-year-old high school student named Nathaniel Jouet walked into the Clovis Carver Public Library in Clovis, New Mexico, carrying a camera bag. Inside the bag were 2 handguns belonging to his father, a .380 and a .45 caliber. Moments earlier, he had posted a photograph of the bag to social media with a 2-word caption that read, simply, "It begins." That morning, before leaving his home, Jouet had recorded 3 video confessions on his phone. In them, he cited bullying, mental illness, and suicidal thoughts. He described himself as someone in pain, someone who felt invisible, someone who believed no one was listening. He was a student at Clovis High School. He was 16 years old, and he had decided that this was the day his silence would end. But none of the people inside the library that afternoon had any idea who Nathaniel Jouet was or what he was carrying. Wanda Walters, 61, had worked as a circulation assistant at the library for years. Christina Carter, 48, was a youth librarian. They were doing their jobs on a Monday afternoon in a small New Mexico city. Jouet emerged from the library bathroom and fired 14 rounds from the .380 in roughly 6 seconds, aiming at no one in particular. He then fired 6 more rounds from the .45, 20 rounds total in a building full of people. Wanda Walters was fatally harmed. Christina Carter was also taken from this world. 4 others were wounded, including Howard Jones, 53, Jessica Throne, 30, and 20-year-old Alexis Molina, who was struck 3 times while shielding her younger brother from the gunfire. The scope of the casualties could have been far worse. Jouet surrendered to police immediately after the shooting ended. He did not resist. He did not attempt to flee. He was indicted on September 8, 2017, on 30 separate counts, including 2 counts of first-degree taking of a life, 7 counts of child abuse, 4 counts of aggravated battery, and 20 counts of assault with intent. In October 2018, he pleaded guilty to all 30 counts as an adult, waiving his right to trial. There would be no insanity defense, no contested jury verdict. Jouet accepted responsibility for every charge. On February 15, 2019, Judge James Hudson sentenced Jouet to 2 life sentences with the possibility of parole, plus a consecutive 40 years on the remaining felonies. Hudson ordered that Jouet continue mental health treatment and have no contact with victims or their families. The judge acknowledged Jouet's documented mental health struggles, but stated clearly that the law required accountability for what had happened inside that library. The civil aftermath extended well beyond the criminal case. In August 2019, the Molina siblings filed a lawsuit against Jouet's father, Christopher Jouet, and his grandfather, William Jouet, who had allegedly supplied one of the firearms. The suit also named a Clovis-based counselor, Eric Banagai, alleging that Jouet had experienced auditory hallucinations and known violent ideation in the period before the shooting, and that those responsible for his care had failed to restrict his access to firearms. That is not a typo, by the way. A teenager with documented hallucinations and a history of violent thoughts had unsecured access to 2 loaded handguns in his own home. Minutes after surrendering, Jouet told the responding officers that he felt awful and that he did not like hurting people. He said this standing in a library where 2 women had just lost their lives and 4 others lay wounded. Wanda Walters had spent years helping patrons check out books. Christina Carter had built her career around introducing children to reading. Neither of them had ever met the boy who walked in with a camera bag that afternoon. As of 2026, Nathaniel Jouet remains in the custody of the New Mexico Department of Corrections, serving 2 life sentences plus 40 consecutive years. His earliest possible parole review remains decades away. The Clovis Carver Public Library has been renovated and remains open to the community that Jouet shattered on that August afternoon. The civil lawsuit filed by the Molina family remains part of the ongoing legal record in the case. If you like this video and haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time to join. We post a new case every day, so hit subscribe and don't miss what's coming next. Charles Hartley. In 2024, a judge in Derbyshire, England, used a phrase during sentencing that has since been repeated across every major UK news outlet. He called it a dreadful epidemic of knife crime. He was not speaking in the abstract. He was not referencing statistics from a government report. He was looking directly at a 17-year-old boy who had smiled before plunging a blade into the chest of another teenager on a December evening, then walked away and gone to a party as though nothing had happened. The victim was Noah Smedley, 18 years old, described by his family as a shining light, full of love, laughter, and joy. Noah was not a stranger to Charles Hartley. They knew each other. On the evening of December 28, 2024, Noah arrived on an electric scooter to meet Hartley's group in the area outside Ilkeston, Derbyshire. According to the prosecution, led by Adrian Langdale KC, Noah sold drugs to one of the members of the group. What happened next was not a deal gone wrong or an argument that spiraled. According to prosecutors, it was deliberate and premeditated. The prosecution presented evidence that Hartley had come to the meeting armed and disguised, that he had concealed the weapon in advance, and that the attack was not a spontaneous reaction to a threat. Hartley, who lived on Station Road in Stanley, had arrived that evening wearing a balaclava and carrying a Rambo-style knife concealed in his tracksuit. He was 17 years old. Prosecutors told the court that Hartley grinned or smiled before deliberately aiming for Noah's chest, puncturing his heart with a single thrust. Noah collapsed on the ground. Hartley left the scene without attempting to help or call for assistance. He went to a party. In the hours that followed, Hartley dumped his clothing, the knife, and his mobile phone in an effort to destroy evidence. He then walked into Ilkeston Police Station and turned himself in. At trial, he claimed self-defense, telling the court that Noah had previously threatened him and that he feared for his safety. The jury did not believe him. After a 2-week trial at Derby Crown Court, during which Detective Constable Emma Barnes Marriott presented the Crown's case for Derbyshire Police, Hartley was found guilty of taking the life of Noah Smedley. During the defense phase, Peter Joyce KC revealed a detail that complicated the moral calculus of the case. Hartley had been formally assessed as a victim of modern slavery just 8 weeks before the attack. He had been exploited by older men to sell drugs, part of the County Lines network that funnels narcotics from major cities into rural English towns through vulnerable teenagers. The judge acknowledged this background, but ruled that it did not excuse or explain a calculated, smiling act of violence. And somehow, it gets worse. A teenager who was himself a documented victim of criminal exploitation turned around and took the life of another young man with a concealed knife over what amounted to a street-level drug transaction. The cycle of violence that County Lines operations leave behind does not stop at the arrest of the adults running the network. It produces cases like this one. Judge Sean Smith, KC, sentenced Hartley to detention at His Majesty's pleasure for life, with a minimum term of 20 years. In his sentencing remarks, the judge referenced what he called an unhealthy fascination with knives and described the case as part of a dreadful epidemic sweeping through the country. The sentence means Hartley will not be eligible for a parole board review until his late 30s at the earliest. As of 2026, Charles Hartley remains in UK custody. His minimum term means he will not be considered for release until the mid-2040s. Noah Smedley's family continues to advocate for stricter knife crime legislation in Derbyshire and has spoken publicly about the need for intervention programs targeting county lines recruitment of young people. Hartley's case was driven by what a judge called fascination. The next case is driven by something even harder to explain, because in this one, the person who took 3 lives was considered a close friend of one of the victims, and he sat through their memorial service without saying a word. Alec Kreider. On May 19, 2007, roughly 200 people gathered at a memorial service in Manheim Township, Pennsylvania, to mourn the Haynes family. Thomas, 50, had been an industrial supply salesman. Lisa, 47, was a preschool teacher. Their son Kevin, a sophomore at Manheim Township High School, was 16. All 3 had been found in their home 1 week earlier, taken from this world in what police initially could not explain. Among the mourners that day was a 16-year-old classmate of Kevin's, named Alec Kreider. He sat through the service. He spoke to grieving friends. Nobody paid particular attention to him because he was exactly where you would expect a classmate to be. What nobody knew at the time was that Alec Kreider was the one who had taken their lives. 1 week earlier, around 2 in the morning on May 12th, Kreider had walked roughly 10 minutes from his mother's home to the Haynes residence on Peach Lane. He entered through an unlocked door, dressed in dark clothing, carrying a 4-inch hunting knife. Thomas Haynes was taken from this world by a single wound to the neck as he slept. Lisa was harmed fatally beside him in their bed. Kreider then moved upstairs to Kevin's room. Kevin fought back briefly before Kreider overpowered him. Kreider returned downstairs and inflicted additional wounds on Lisa to ensure she had not survived. A 4th family member, 20-year-old daughter Maggie, was home that night. She awoke to a struggle, ran to her parents' bedroom, and found her mother in a mortal state. Her mother told her to go get help, and Maggie fled across the street to a neighbor's house. The investigation baffled detectives for weeks. There was no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. There was no sexual element to the crime. There was no apparent motive of any kind. Bloodhounds tracked a scent from the Haynes home to Pennsylvania Route 501, but investigators ultimately dismissed the dog's trail as inconclusive. The case seemed to have no direction. Detectives interviewed over 150 students from Manheim Township High School, including Kreider. He cooperated. He answered their questions. He gave no indication that he had any connection to what had happened. And for 5 weeks, the case went nowhere. The break came on June 16, 2007, when Kreider's own father, Tim Kreider, called police. Tim told investigators that his son had confessed to him 2 days earlier, on June 14th. Alec had told his father that he had cleaned himself up at his mother's house after leaving the Haynes residence that night. A journal recovered by investigators contained an entry in which Kreider wrote that he despised happy people. When police asked him why he had done it, he offered only that Kevin had been annoying him lately. You would think someone would have said something before it reached this point. Nobody did. On June 17, 2008, Kreider pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree taking of a life. He received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Under the Supreme Court's ruling in Roper v. Simmons, the death penalty was not available because he was under 18 at the time of the offense. If Kreider had stopped at the guilty plea, this would be a very different story. He did not. In the years following his sentencing, Kreider appeared on the list of Lancaster County juvenile lifers awaiting resentencing under Miller v. Alabama, the 2012 Supreme Court decision that prohibited mandatory life without parole for juveniles. The county had paused hearings pending a related state case. Kreider never made it to a resentencing hearing. On January 20, 2017, at the age of 25, Alec Kreider took his own life in his cell at SCI Camp Hill. Tim Kreider later published a memoir titled Refuse to Drown. Multiple true crime programs have covered the case, including episodes of Unusual Suspects, Nightmare Next Door, and Evil Lives Here. As of 2026, the Haynes family's case remains closed. Maggie Haynes, the sole survivor, has not spoken publicly. Kreider walked 10 minutes to take the lives of a family he knew. The next case took place inside a school in the middle of the day, and the attacker had never spoken a word to his victim before that moment. John Odgren, a student sitting in a bathroom stall at Lincoln Sudbury Regional High School in Massachusetts, heard the voice of another student cry out. The boy was saying, "Stop, you are hurting me." And then there was silence. When the student looked out, he saw a 16-year-old named John Odgren sitting on the bathroom floor in a fetal position, a kitchen carving knife resting on the counter. Odgren was repeating the same words over and over. "Oh my God, what did I just do?" It was January 19th, 2007. The boy who had cried out was James Allenson, a 15-year-old freshman at Lincoln Sudbury. He and Odgren had never met. They shared no classes, no social circles, no prior interaction of any kind. James had no reason to expect danger in a school bathroom in the middle of the day. He staggered out of the bathroom and collapsed in the hallway. He did not survive his injuries. Nobody saw it coming, and no one who knew Odgren expected what happened that day. He was a special needs student from Princeton, Massachusetts, bused into Lincoln Sudbury under an educational placement program. He had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, major depression, anxiety, and bipolar features. His IQ was measured at approximately 140. He had brought the knife from home, concealed in his clothing, and carried it through the school's hallways without anyone noticing. When a teacher arrived at the scene moments later, Odgren told him directly that he had done it, that he had just snapped, and that he did not know why. Pay attention to that phrasing, because it explains what happened at trial. The trial took place in April 2010 at Middlesex Superior Court. Defense attorney Jonathan Shapiro mounted a full insanity defense, calling 3 child behavioral specialists who testified that Odgren had lost touch with reality at the time of the attack. The defense emphasized his deep fixation with the number 19, drawn from Stephen King's Dark Tower series, and pointed out that the attack occurred on January 19, 2007. They argued this was not coincidence, but evidence of a mind consumed by delusional thinking. Prosecutor Jerry Leone and Assistant DA Bennett pushed back hard. They pointed to the concealed knife, the deliberate planning required to bring it from home and hide it on his person, and a detail that undercut the insanity claim entirely. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, Odgren had asked a school official a question about what the sentencing range for manslaughter looked like. That single question suggested he understood the legal reality of what he had just done, which is difficult to reconcile with a claim that he was disconnected from reality. On April 29, 2010, the jury convicted Odgren of first-degree taking of a life with premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty. He was sentenced the following day to mandatory life without parole. And no, I am not making that up. A teenager with a documented genius-level IQ and a shelf of psychiatric diagnoses was convicted of a premeditated act against a boy he had never spoken to, in a school bathroom, on a date that matched his literary obsession. The Asperger's defense, which had been central to the entire trial strategy, was rejected by the jury in its entirety. In September 2019, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court unanimously upheld the conviction in an opinion written by Justice Cipher. The court rejected challenges based on his age and his Asperger's diagnosis. Under a 2013 ruling by the same court that barred mandatory juvenile life without parole in Massachusetts, Odgren's sentence was converted to parole eligible after 15 years. His defense attorney, Patricia Guerin, stated publicly in 2019 that Odgren would seek parole in January 2022, the earliest eligible date. As of 2026, John Odgren remains in the custody of the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. No public confirmation of a parole grant has been reported. The Allenson family established a scholarship fund in James's name and previously filed suit against the special education program that placed Odgren at Lincoln Sudbury. Odgren's attack was random. The next case was deeply personal, carried out by a teenage boy against the one person who was supposed to be untouchable. Zachary Davis. When Hendersonville, Tennessee police arrived at a burning house on August 10, 2012, they expected a fire investigation. What they found instead was a 15-year-old boy named Zachary Davis, standing near the property, calm and cooperative. He told them his mother was still inside. When officers asked him what had happened, his response was delivered in a flat, emotionless tone that investigators would later describe in court as chilling. He told them he had taken her life. He told them he had used a sledgehammer. And when they asked why he had struck her so many times, he responded that he wanted to make sure she was gone. There was no emotion in his voice. There was no attempt to explain or justify. He stated the facts as though he were describing something that had happened to someone else. Melanie Davis had been asleep in her bed when her son attacked her. The medical examiner's report documented roughly 12 to 20 blows. After the attack, Davis set the house on fire, while his older brother Josh was sleeping upstairs. Josh survived. Zachary's father had passed away from ALS when Zachary was 9 years old. The family relocated after the loss, and according to his paternal grandmother, Gail Cron, Zachary was cut off from her support network during a period when his mental health was deteriorating with no professional intervention. Cron later testified that she had tried to maintain contact and provide support but was shut out. The defense would argue that severe, untreated psychosis had been building in Zachary for years before the night he acted. Investigators recovered phone applications related to serial offenders and torture devices from Davis's phone. A notebook found in his room contained the line, "You cannot spell laughter without slaughter." In his formal statement to police, delivered in the same flat tone, Davis said he had felt nothing when he took his mother's life. Defense psychiatrist Dr. Freeman later testified that Davis's judgment at the time of the attack was driven by psychosis, not rational thought. The prosecution disagreed. Before the case reached trial, the story went national. On May 22nd, Dr. Phil McGraw aired a jailhouse interview in which Davis recounted the events of that night in what the show described as a flat, monotone voice, showing no visible emotion as he walked through each detail. The interview became one of the most widely viewed segments associated with the case and shaped public perception of Davis before the jury was ever seated. The trial lasted 4 days in April 2015 at Sumner County Criminal Court. Defense attorney Randy Lucas argued untreated mental illness and called Dr. Freeman to support the claim of psychosis. The prosecution presented the notebook, the phone applications, and the police interview. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding Davis guilty of first-degree taking of a life, attempted first-degree taking of a life for the arson that endangered his brother Josh, and aggravated arson. The conviction carried an automatic life sentence under Tennessee law. On June 5, 2015, Judge D. David Gay added consecutive 20-year sentences for the attempted charge and the arson count. Under Tennessee law, a life sentence equals 60 years, with parole eligibility after 51. The stacked sentences put Davis's effective minimum at roughly 71 years behind bars before he can appear before a parole board. In his remarks, the judge told Davis that he had become evil, that he had gone to the dark side, and that the most troubling aspect of the entire case was the total absence of remorse at any point from the night of the crime through the trial itself. Defense attorney Lucas filed notice of appeal under Miller v. Alabama and Montgomery v. Louisiana, arguing that the stacked sentences constituted de facto life without parole for a juvenile offender. Judge Gay denied the motion for a new trial. No successful appeal has been reported in Tennessee appellate records since. As of 2026, Zachary Davis remains in the custody of the Tennessee Department of Corrections, initially housed at the Lois M. DeBerry Special Needs Facility in Nashville. Davis's crime was an eruption of violence inside a home, directed at someone he knew his entire life. The final case on this list is something different altogether. It did not begin with a weapon. It began with a computer screen, a chat room, and months of patient, deliberate manipulation. Louis Daines. On the evening of February 17, 2014, a man in Grays, Essex, picked up his phone and called the police. The operator asked him a simple question. Had he taken someone's life? He answered yes. He was 18 years old. The person in his flat was 14. The name of the caller was Louis Daines, a computer engineer who operated under the online handle Eagle16. The person in his flat was Breck Bednar, a 14-year-old boy from Caterham, Surrey, who had been lured there through months of online grooming disguised as friendship and mentorship. Daines ran an online gaming server where a small group of roughly 6 boys, including Breck, regularly played Call of Duty and Battlefield. Over a period of months, Daines cultivated Breck with promises of great wealth through a fictional software company he claimed to be building. He deepened his control gradually, positioning himself as a mentor and authority figure within the group while working to drive a wedge between Breck and his parents. He told the boys in the group that Breck's family was holding him back from his potential. Breck's mother, Lauren LaFave, saw the warning signs before anyone else. By December 2013, the family had confiscated Breck's IT equipment and met with other parents in the gaming group to discuss their concerns about Daines. LaFave took the additional step of contacting Surrey police directly to report Daines and the nature of his relationship with her son. The call was mishandled. No meaningful action was taken. Daines, it would later emerge, was already known to Essex police at that time. He had been investigated in 2011 in connection with alleged offenses against another minor and possession of prohibited material, but no charges were pursued. In early February 2014, while Breck was on a school exchange trip to Spain, Daines contacted him and claimed to be ill, creating urgency and emotional pressure to maintain contact. Shortly after Breck returned, Daines arranged and paid for a taxi to bring the boy from his home in Surrey to the flat on Rosebery Road in Grays on February 16th. Breck's family did not know he had left. What happened inside that flat was later described by Crown Prosecutor Jenny Hopkins, then Chief Crown Prosecutor for the Southeast, as one of the most cruel, violent, and unusual cases her office had ever dealt with. Court filings described the act as driven by sadistic motivation. The pathologist determined that the fatal injury was inflicted from behind and that Breck's passing came rapidly. After the attack, Daines photographed the scene and sent images to other members of the online gaming group, including messages routed through mutual friends that reached Breck's younger siblings, who were 12-year-old triplets. He then submerged his computer equipment in water to destroy evidence before calling the police himself. Daines initially entered a not guilty plea. On the day his trial was scheduled to begin at Chelmsford Crown Court in November 2014, he changed his plea to guilty. On January 12, 2015, Mrs. Justice Laura Cox sentenced Daines to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years, on the basis that the act was driven by sadistic or sexual motivation. 5 additional charges related to the 2011 investigation were dropped, given the severity of the conviction. After the sentencing, Surrey Police was referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission for the mishandled report from Brecht's mother. An independent investigation followed. In March 2016, Surrey Police formally apologized to the Lefebvre family and paid an undisclosed settlement. Lauren Lefebvre channeled her grief into advocacy. She founded the Brecht Foundation, which delivers in-school online safety education across the United Kingdom. The foundation's work has reached thousands of students and trained hundreds of educators. BBC Three produced a documentary called Murder Games in January 2016, telling Brecht's story to warn young people about the dangers of online grooming. The Foundation's flagship awareness campaign is widely known as Brecht's Last Game, built around Brecht's own story. As of 2026, Lewis Daines remains in the UK prison system. His earliest possible parole review falls around 2039. The Brecht Foundation continues its work in schools across the country. 10 cases, 10 life sentences handed down before any of them turned 20. As of 2026, 9 of the 10 remain behind bars. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.